So first of all, thank you everyone for joining. We had started Signal earlier last year in the summer, and we had a few very successful sessions. And I hope the first few days of Ramadan has treated everyone well, and it's been a great year so far, 2026. I think this is the first time we're connecting after the new year. So thank you for joining. So Signal, just to give a little bit of introduction, so to say, for those who haven't joined our sessions before. It's an ongoing series by the University of Dubai's Innovation, Entrepreneurship and Business Center, where we try to bring together experts not only locally, but also globally that sit at the intersection of technology, entrepreneurship, business, and innovation. So we try to do some like market research and understand what topics you guys are interested to learn. And we then scout for our experts who very generously give us some time and share with us very interesting insights. So if you have been a part of the community before, we've sort of spoken about AI in this new age of hiring. We've spoken about agile methodologies and a mindset that's agile and iterative. We've also spoken about sustainability frameworks. Each of those conversations was focused on startup and strategic capacity building. And today's session builds on that same sort of startup thinking, but we plan to go a little bit deeper into those topics and something that is a skill that can be used across those topics. So we're diving into one of the most consequential aspects of building in deep technologies. It's about the early decisions that you face as a startup founder who's building in tech that can either determine whether your innovation becomes scalable, investable, and defensible or not, right? So very interesting topic. I will introduce you to our speakers and the topic for today. The title of the session is Advising Deep Tech Startups, IP Scale and Key Founder Decisions. And we've sort of seen the deep tech founders face multiple forms of decisions when it comes to protecting intellectual property, to also just structuring for long-term value creation that's scalable. And this session brings together leading experts and perspectives in those domains. So hopefully we'll cover how IP strategy shapes up defensibility, whether you have a moat, scale, and investor readiness. We'll also talk about what to patent, how to patent, when to patent, and what sort of mistakes to avoid. And we'll also get some top tips, hopefully, from experienced advisors in the world of deep technology who can give us access into what sort of key decisions are required for market readiness. So that's a little bit about our session today. I just want to make sure that Dr. Sayf, our speaker, is here because he had some trouble with the microphone. Yes, amazing. Okay, perfect. Then
I apologize.
we're all
Sorry
good.
about that.
No, we're all good. So I'm just going to dive in then into the introductions and we can start making this a little bit more interactive, right? So we have with us Mr. Roman and Dr. Sayf today. Mr. Roman is a registered patent attorney at Denton's based in New York. And he helps tech-driven companies really go through their global patent strategy and portfolio development. He has deep tech expertise across software, AI, medical devices, industrial technologies, and I'm sure a lot more that he'll share today. And with his sort of background as an inventor himself, Mr. Roman aligns IP architecture directly with business outcomes and ROI directly with research and development initiatives. So thanks so much, Mr. Roman, for joining us this evening for us, morning for you, afternoon. I hope you're having a great day so far and excited to hear your insights.
Thank you for having me. Glad to participate on this panel.
Amazing. And then we have Dr. Sayf, who is actually a part of the University of Dubai's Innovation Center's advisory committee. So you'll be hearing from him quite a lot as we build our initiatives. But to give you a background, Dr. Sayf is a serial deep tech founder himself. He has about 15 international patents across radar technology, healthcare, and drones and physical security. He also served as CTO, CEO, and chairman across multiple ventures when it comes to deep technologies and frontier tech. So he really has his eyes on technology that can be scaled globally and locally in terms of startups as well. So before we get started, I just wanted to we usually do a little bit of an icebreaker to understand a little bit more about our speakers. So these are a little bit relevant, but more general questions for our audience to really understand a little bit more about you. I'm just going to ask you three very quick questions, and it's sort of rapid fire. So if you want to give me your first thoughts, that would be amazing. So the first one's about what you're reading or what you've read recently. Is there a book that you're currently reading or you've read recently around innovation strategy, startups that really stood out to you and you enjoyed and you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I like this book. Read this book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's not a recent book, but periodically I look at it just to think about things. It talks about, different ways how outlying um, people or factors can cause more important and outlying and grandeur effects later on.
Okay, so you said Outlier by Malcolm. What was his last
Malcolm
name?
Gladwell.
Gladwell. Perfect. I'm going to share that on our group later as well. Thanks so much. Dr. Sayf?
You might not like my answer, but it's I started reading Euclid's Elements, the classical Greek text, translated into English, obviously. And it was recommended to me because you learn geometry through this with no numbers. It's proofs from basic elements. Like you could go into the wilderness, make tools, and start doing geometry if you understand these concepts. So those all my feeling was in the days of AI is computational. The human mind is not. So we need to develop the human mind rather than simply trying to beat the AI at computation and things like that. So that's why I was trying to go to these very fundamental concepts.
Okay, amazing. That's a very interesting one. And I think it's always nice to think of different faculties and how they can sort of mold our thinking day to day as well, especially for founders. So thanks for that. The next one is around deep tech startups, our topic today. Has there been a deep tech startup that you've either directly advised, it's okay to have some bias, or that you've come across in the recent past that really something that they were building really stood out to you and you've maybe referenced this company, they might be early stage, but anything our viewers should sort of keep an eye out for in terms of a deep tech startup that caught your eye personally?
Something that I think is a cool deep tech startup in terms of technology that I work with is a company called Zoomagri. I think they have a unique solution to a unique problem, and I think that their technology is pretty innovative. Generally, what they're trying to do is use AI to read seeds, grains, barley when those are transported on boats or trucks
Okay.
or whatever, and it allows you to determine quality of the grains, the barley, the beans, and the seeds. I thought that's pretty unique.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sharing. Dr. Sayf, what about you?
The one I really maybe not. Well, anyway, the one that I came across recently that I thought was brilliant was a Supabase, because rather than competing directly in the AI space against the other AI companies, they're building infrastructure that's meant for the AIs that can generate apps and other programs and code quickly. And I think that if you're not one of those leaders, that's a great place to look. Is that supporting the leaders and having businesses that support who is out there in the front of AI, for example.
Okay, perfect. No, thanks so much for that. I've made a note and I'm going to share these as well for those who couldn't make it live today. And the last one before I sort of leave it to you guys is, this is the cliched one, but I think a lot of people will appreciate it. So one piece of advice that you'd actually give to a startup founder who's maybe in their early 20s building in this space. It could be something that you heard and made an impact on you, or it could be something that you've sort of discovered over time. Not to make it too heavy, but it is. I know it is a cliched one, but I know people would appreciate it. So, any thoughts?
I would say.
I guess. Go ahead, Roman.
I would say, don't operate like a headless chicken. think before you do things. Speed is important, but sometimes going slower gets you further.
Okay. Very contextually relevant, I think, in this environment as well. So thanks for that. Perfect. Dr. Sayf?
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. And I would maybe extend it a little bit and say, and this is definitely, I lived this the hard way, is understanding the how long it takes to go from something working in a lab or on your computer or something to being able to be deployed or work anywhere, or certainly be commercializable and have users using it. That is a very long time and distance typically. And if you understand that, you can maybe make decisions earlier on to compress that. If you go like Roman's saying, if you go for the fastest or the most flashy decision, and maybe one of the longest, and you'll run out of money, run out of whatever before you ever get there. You might be able to do something less flashy, less big, but you get there quickly and you establish that, okay, this is real, we have a real business here, and then you can move on from there. So those early decisions can be very, very critical.
That's very thematic and topical. I think a perfect segue into me giving you both the floor. And, this is the format. I just want to say that we've done moderated panels before, but I think this fireside chat between you and Mr. Roman is something to really enjoy for our audience today. So I'll hand it over to you guys. I have some slides, so just, give me a cue if you want your slide up. And thanks so much again. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you both.
Sounds good. So Sayf,
Thank you
just
very much. Yes.
Going into the comment that you just made, what early insight had the biggest downstream impact for you that you thought of and you said, wow, this is looking back now that I think has impacted my business?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really choosing the market. I think if you have some deep tech that you've invented or something, you're probably the expert in that, and it's unlikely someone will just beat you. So your next task is to choose the market, right? So, and again, that can change so many of your decisions. For example, going into like the oil and gas industry, we looked at that early on, and the amount of safety regulations that go into that is tremendous, and that hurt things early on. For example, you can go into other markets that are far less regulated, and means you can move very fast. So it's understanding how your tech is going to be used early on by the end user is very important. But let me
does that have like pro considerations on both sides? Maybe you can expand on that.
Both sides of what? Sorry.
To go like faster versus slower, versus less regulations, more regulations.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so you can, because moving fast is, if you want to just work hard and move fast, that's great. But if you run into regulations where it takes time to get things approved, it takes time to find things that are outside of your control, you're not moving fast anymore, right?
So something like if you want to sell something on Amazon, which is just a product, you got to get it certified to be safe and things like that, versus like some kind of a dealing with the government where there's a lot of regulations and regulatory field. In those situations, you would have to weigh the pros and cons, which market to enter.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, and you got to really go very deep, and that's why if you're really targeting like a certain market, you want to have a co-founder or an early employee who's from that market. They'll have insights and experience that it's very tough for you to gain from the outside. So that's and then once you do choose that market, do your research, go to trade shows, do whatever you can to really immerse yourself in that market and understand the sensibilities of that market. The sensibilities of consumer electronics is very different from cars, for many reasons. So you have to understand that they're not the same world, even though your tech might be the same, But then let me ask you, Roman. So and it's something I ran into as well. What are like IP mistakes that can be made early on as a founder. If you have that deep tech, you're probably going to be putting patents all over it, right? So, what are some early mistakes there that you've seen people make?
Yeah, that's a good question. The two big ones that jump to mind, first is publicizing your invention before filing any patents on it. The reason why that's important is because um, in some territories like China and Europe, if you publish your invention before you file for a patent, you may never get a valid patent in that country because it's just the way the law is set up there. You have to file patents first. In other countries like United States, Canada, I think Japan, there's the thing what's called a grace period, and that allows you to have 1 year to get something on file in those countries. And so even if you somehow publicly disclose, you have up to 1 year from that moment of disclosure to get something on file. In contrast, in China and Europe, they don't have that. So the common mistake that I see, one of the biggest common mistakes that I see is people just disclosing it and trying to go to the market and sell, and then they realize, oh yeah, this has traction. Let me go get filed for a patent, and they realize either you're within the grace period and you're already limited your rights to countries that have the grace period, or you're outside the grace period and you're done. You can't get patent on that technology anywhere. The other problem that I also find is people don't file at all.
Oh, wow.
And they
Okay.
think about patents. They think about patents later. They think that I can wing it. So sometimes maybe that's true. Sometimes maybe patents are not appropriate for you, but at least having a cohesive, holistic IP strategy to determine what do I patent, what do I keep as a trade secret, what do I trademark, what do I copyright, allows you to at least show your investors you thought about it, who are usually more sophisticated, if you're thinking that way, than you are in IP, and just keeps things cleaner later on if there's some competitive advantage to having that concept. So someone just put something in the chat.
Yes, it's a trade secret, no patent.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So basically, yeah. So if you want, Simran, if you want to pull up the slide that I shared, the Coca-Cola bottle. So, and then we'll go into the next slide. So if you look at the slide, the Coca-Cola bottle, you'll see, I mean, you can have multiple types of intellectual property covering the same product. So here, the easiest way to think about it is Coca-Cola bottle. The cap is protected by patents. The design, the aesthetic appearance of a bottle is protected by design patents, design rights. The copyright would be like the Coca-Cola packaging and the advertising. The trade secrets would be the formula of the Coke itself, and the branding would be Coke and Coca-Cola and things like that. So these are things that you should think about. But if you go to the next slide, Simran, the one that has the patenting versus keeping as a trade secret. Yep. So these are the things to think about for someone who's considering trade secrets and patents. Just because you can does not necessarily mean that you should. Just because you can patent something does not always mean that you should file something. Now, how do you make that decision? Well, it's not like a binary yes or no. There's not one factor that's dispositive. But as you could see on the table shown, at least in the context of AI, you could think there's a bunch of factors to think about. Like one of them that I think is an important one is infringement detection, right? If you can detect infringement through reverse engineering and things like that legally, then I think that's something you want to consider filing a patent on. On the other side, if something is a trade secret and you could never figure out whether someone's actually doing it or making it, then you might want to keep that as a trade secret. So in the context of AI, for example, or software or some kind of maybe chemical industrial process, if all you have is the end product, but there's no way to see how it actually gets to the result, it may not necessarily make sense to file something for a patent. But that's just something that's one of the analysis you got to do to think about the holistic strategy so you don't get burnt down the end. So I guess like my takeaway is just, speed is important, but consult with advisors that are experts in their fields, that are relevant, whether it's accountants, lawyers, finance people, so you don't go too fast and burn yourself.
Well, let me ask you, Roman, what constitutes disclosure? So I know, like, our audience, I think, might be a lot of students and stuff. Like, if you publish a paper at a conference, like, you can't patent after that, can you?
Well, so the question is how much of detailed disclosure is in the paper. So, for example, if the paper is the standard for disclosure is considered person skilled in the field. So, if the paper is sufficiently detailed that someone can read the paper and using average knowledge in the field build your invention, usually that's considered a publication. But if you just give like a high level description of the invention, I invented a machine to travel in time, without explaining the how, it's probably not considered a disclosure because I have no idea what that means. It's such an abstract concept. But if you go into detail and teach me in the paper how the machine works, how it travels in time, that would be considered a disclosure that's relevant. So if you have to disclose, try to keep things at a high level versus the details.
Okay. And so and you certainly can't wait until like someone else does what you're doing and then try to patent.
Well, the risk that you run is someone else either files a patent on something similar, or your idea becomes obvious over some publication out there that someone else published. So people invent all day long, 24/7, globally, in every country, in every jurisdiction. People put up their findings, their research, their results, all the way, on all the papers and patents. So even if you wait, there's a possibility that someone else may have publish something that makes your idea obvious. So recommendation, that I always give is, if you think something is really valuable, think about just getting quickly something on file. There are ways to do it cost effectively that at least stops the clock from that perspective. Someone asked the question in the chat, if I have a trade secret and then after some time someone independently files for a patent for my trade secret, will I be able to continue? So that's a country-specific question. Each country has their own laws on trade secrets and patents. There's devils in the details. In the United States, there was a case in the 80s, I think, or in the 70s. I think it was called Lockwood Airlines. Someone came up with this. American Airlines came up with an idea of making tickets using some kind of a secret process, and they never filed a patent on it, and they kept it as a trade secret. Years later, some guy came up with an idea to do the exact same thing, and he filed a patent on it. And he discovered American Airlines was using that trade secret, and he sued them on infringement of a patent. And if I recall correctly, the court said that the patent is not valid because the benefit of the trade secret was being commercialized, which is the ticket. Ticket was being sold, and therefore the commercialization of the ticket in the United States was considered to be prior art against the patent. So to answer the question, it's a very country-specific and science-specific scenario that needs to be investigated further. But moving on to the next topic, Sayf, maybe you can talk about some of the ways in terms of you mentioned that to me previously that it's important where your technology fits in the bigger in a bigger scheme of things or in a tech stack. Can you sort of expand on that?
Yeah. That's super important, and that's kind of what I was getting at before. Is that your tech is probably part of another system, right? So you need to understand where it fits in that system, and how it affects that system, and how it affects the end user, right? So what is the end user's view of your technology? Okay, so for example, if you invent something that makes an amazing tire for a car, I'm sure it's very good, but that tire is part of a much more expensive car, and what does it exactly do for the car? Is it safety? Is it cost? Things like that, and so understanding that is very important. And again, that's very specific as to what exactly what technology you have, and again, what market you've chosen, what product you've chosen. And when I say product, it can mean service too, obviously, just depending on whatever's going on. But try to think like the end user. Like, people buy tires, but they're buying cars, really. And so if they're buying a car, what's their view of your tire? If that car can say, well, okay, we're safer now when it rains, okay, that could be a very high dollar amount, right? But if you just say, well, our tires are the same as everyone else's tire, but they're 10% cheaper, that's a very dangerous argument in general, because first of all, 10% of the tire is probably, maybe 1% of the car overall. And second of all, if you're only competing on price, then someone else may come along and beat you by 10%, right? And now you have to beat them by 10%. And so we call it a race to the bottom, right? So I've heard it said that no one wins a price war, because both of you just have to drop your prices to nothing, and that's it. So again, understanding where your technology fits and how it affects the end user is very, very important.
Does it matter
And
when you're dealing with physical products versus you dealing with software products, given the scale?
yeah, so I mean, it's definitely a very different set of considerations. For software, with so much software these days, we're not seeing people paying for software, really. They're paying for services, right? So the software itself is essentially given away for free these days, and what you're paying for is a service on top of that is enabled by that software, right? So again, if you can make things more secure, for example, if you can just make that service better for some reason, that's very powerful. And since you mentioned it, some of the best things these days are a combination of hardware and software, right? Where you have hardware and software that enables a service that can be very, very powerful. And the classic example of that is Apple, right? You can't just buy an iPhone. You need an iPhone, you need iOS, and now you can use the Apple ecosystem and the apps and everything like that. So those are definitely some of the considerations. But again, it just comes down to exactly what you're doing.
Let me ask you, and our audience is has a wide geographic spread. In your opinion, does it matter where culture does culture of the where are you developing versus where you want to sell? Are those things to think about? How do you think about those things?
Oh, tremendously. No, one of my companies is dealing with that right now. So culture is huge. And again, that's thinking like the end user. The end user in China or in the Emirates might use your product in a very different way than someone in America. And I'll give you a great example. That in the Emirates, for example, and a lot of the Middle East, they skipped the web page era. And so that's not just culture. That was actually like physical reality on the ground, that when web pages were really important for a company in the US, some other places in the world didn't have great internet access. So web pages were just never important. So now that everyone has very fast internet access, we don't use web pages so much. We use more social media and things like that. So a lot of businesses put their focus more on social media rather than a web page. So it's not just culture; it can actually be physical reality, depending on where you are. Like one of the biggest shifts was in GPS units. So back in the early 2000s, having a GPS unit was great. It stored the maps locally inside the device. It used the GPS signals, and you could navigate. Right now, no one buys GPS anymore because we all have our phones and everything's on the phone. When you're in a place that has good internet access, right? But for people who are don't have this great cellular or mobile internet access, something like a GPS unit is still very important. So there's culture and there's physical reality, actually, of your geography, like you said.
It's interesting that you bring this up because in IP, I think it's very important when in dealing with deep tech, such as software, when it's being managed from a cloud provider, whether it's Amazon, Google, given and Europe, for example, given their protection on privacy, GPDR, however you pronounce it. The idea to think about intellectual property from on a global basis and not just like territorial basis. People usually think, oh, United States, America, the best patents in the world. Let me only file in the United States and just ignore everything. But given the fact that between India and China, it's half the world, and then you also have to think about geopolitics when you're dealing with IP. Because if you have physical things that you're shipping, you got to think about sanctions and logistics and tariffs and all these things. The culture of use and also the culture of how people in that country actually get the product becomes important. So if you want to protect it, I think you have to think about, sit like playing the game of Risk, put it in front of you and think about where you put the pieces to make it life very complicated and expensive for your enemies.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and the supply chain issues and shipping and tariffs and everything you just brought up, makes it complex for you to sell your product as well as you to potentially get parts and things for your product. So you have more of I think a software background. I'm more from a hardware background. So I'm always thinking about like, how are we going to get these chips? How are we going to get these materials and things like that? So it can be very, very challenging.
Does that play an impact for you in terms of thinking about the IP, in terms of the IP strategy? Like Dr. Rasul Asal mentioned about the trade secrets, like given the fact that, sometimes you can get the components, sometimes you can't get the components. Sometimes there's tariffs, sometimes there's something else. Does that play an impact in terms of, on your end, as a founder of startups, where do I seek protection for? Because sometimes the parts may be more valuable than the invention itself. Like if you think about the blades, like the shaving of the Gillette model, where you make the money on the blade and not the actual invention, which is the shaver itself.
That's exactly right. And I think what's worked well for me is going to modularity rather than having the smallest possible device where everything is, integrated into one unit. It's great, it's small, but you're depending on the exact chip and the exact package to get that to work, right? Whereas if you can go to a more modular approach where you just kind of put things together using connectors and whatnot, it insulates you from supply chain issues more so because you can change things out. And going back to our previous themes, it's a great way to package trade secrets. Because if you have a little module with a little programmable chip inside, and you can download software into that chip, and the chip just does its magic, and the software never leaves the inside of that module, that's very powerful, and that can be used to great effect as well. So packaging your IP is another good reason to go with a modular approach to things, apart from supply chain shocks.
Yeah, and that's usually. Go ahead.
Yeah. So something I learned from you, Roman, actually, is can they learn the idea? And you have a lot of experience with that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's Simran, if you can just put up that trade secret slide back up again. The idea of I don't know if that slide is up, but I hope people could see it. But generally, like the trade secret patenting, is a big decision point that I usually talk with my clients. Generally, I always say just because you can do something does not necessarily mean that you should do something. You should make a decision that makes sense for you, whether it's commercially, because investors want it. There's got to be a reason why you're doing it, not just because everyone's doing it. But like if you think about like the chips, whether it's hardware, whether it's some code, whether it's some chemical formula, some unique manufacturing process. You got to think about these things, right? So the first one, if you look at the table shown on the screen, is the ability to detect something, to detect infringement. Can I look, if my product is on the market, if my enemy gets the product, can they take it apart? Can they reverse engineer it? Can they detect the code and things like that? Versus, no, they can't, because all I'm providing is the access point, and all the magic happens somewhere in the back end. And the back end, I'm never going to find out how anyone else is doing it, and this is my secret sauce, so I'd rather not patent it. But the front end, the computing terminal, I don't really care about. It's not really a moneymaker for me. But what's important for me is the service, and that is not something I'm just going to be able to police. Something else to think about, and I think Dr. Rasul Asal mentioned in this point, is the exclusivity period, right? So the benefit of a trade secret, it could theory last for a long time. Think about Coca-Cola recipe, right? That's been around for over 100 years, I think. Until today, no one knows the exact formula. Same thing with Dr. Pepper soda, same situation, right? Or you have maybe some unique chemical process to generate some maybe pharmaceutical composition, or maybe some industrial process to make some compound. So that theoretically can last for a long time, in contrast with a patent that lasts for 20 years monopoly. So those things will expire, and then then it becomes a race to the bottom, like Sayf you just mentioned. Something else to think about is that you have to disclose how your invention works if you're applying for a patent. And when keeping something as a trade secret, I mean, there's things you should do, but there's no public disclosure that's required. Right? Again, enforcement mechanism, again, is different. If you have a patent, you go to court to litigate it. In trade secret, you just have to show that someone breached, their non-disclosure agreement and disclosed the confidential information to somebody that they're not supposed to. So it's a different level of enforcement. And broader speaking, like as a trade secret, it covers also the know-how, the radar, the training data. So then if you're versus like a patenting something which is a physical thing that you're trying to protect. So like Sayf, and maybe you could talk about it. Like I know, in my experience working with radar, right? There's physical things, and there's stuff behind the scenes that no one even knows about how it works.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, if I were to use a very personal example, with the radar, obviously there's two things, so our radar hardware and the way it actually collects, its data, which is distance data, basically, right? That we, as you know, we put a lot of patents around that, and we wanted to protect that, but then so often the insights and the interpretation of the data, that's internal, and it's usually specific to like a market. For example, a radar unit on a car is going to be very different than a radar unit for security, right? So what you do with that data, how you do it, no one really needs to know that, right? Like for security, we put the radar units in the field. The radar units detect something bad, right? And we don't necessarily tell them how it detects something bad, but in the end, we just produce an alert. Hey, something bad happened at this location. A security guard or a camera or something or drone needs to go and like look at that location. We don't tell them how. It's a very simple alert. Hey, something happened, right? Please go check it out.
Yes, you make actually a good point. Like if some of our audience is our students, right? So if they have ideas and if they want to pitch to companies, how do they do it in a way that's safe? So something that I was thinking about, to have like a demo safe version, something that tells them generally the parameters of the sandbox, but not what's inside the sandbox. What do you think about that?
I think you're spot on, and again, I think that will force you to think like the end user. If I'm selling a security product, for the most part, they don't care how it works, really. They want to know, okay, when I put this on my fence, it can detect an intrusion, for example. That's it. They if you start trying to explain, if I start trying to explain to them the details of how radar works and why mine is better and this and that, they almost see it as a waste of time. Like, look, just tell me what I need to know. How much is it going to cost? Does it work in the rain? You know, things like that's it. That's all I care about. You know, so uh, and the one thing you have to disclose, unfortunately, even as a trade secret, is that it's possible, right? And that simple fact can often be all someone needs to come start trying to do what you do. Because going back to the Coca-Cola example, you know, I buy Coca-Cola, I drink it, I taste it. I don't know what's in it, but I know that someone made it. Someone made Coca-Cola, right? So someone else can come along and say, okay, I'm going to try to make something similar. Why not? It's possible, obviously, right? And maybe they get it a little bit wrong, and so then you see Pepsi, you know, then someone else does it a little bit wrong, you get Dr. Pepper, you know, or something like that. So there's that one key fact, that the fact that it's possible. So actually, there could be more than one, right? A, it's possible. B, it costs a certain price. So not only can I make Coca-Cola, I can make it and sell it for $1 or something. You know, those two things you can't hide. And those, and for someone trying to copy you or something, those are very important pieces of information.
Those are good points. Those are good points. I just want to mention that several questions that were asked. Dr. Rasul Asal asked, once a patent is granted in the US, Europe, and China, what's the best way to actually police it? How do you realistically monitor infringement quickly and across different markets? So that's a good question. So being a lawyer, my answer is going to be depends. So one of the ways to think about it is depends what. So when I say that, I mean, what's the subject matter? If you're dealing with software, you're dealing with hardware, you're dealing with some process, those things have to be considered. But let's just pick the simplest example. Let's assume you have software. So software, once you know, there's going to be a website. There's going to be marketing some software. So one way to consider monitoring for infringement is to have certain keywords that you monitor for. You set up like a Google patent alert, a Google alert for certain words that your software uses, certain keywords, agent, LLM, you know, multimodal, and then you get those alerts. And then as over time, you tweak the wording so you get more and more specific as to what you're looking for. So that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is to use LLMs like ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude, set them for deep search, put in your patent claims that are granted, and then schedule them or make your own schedule on Google Calendar and to periodically, you know, once a month, run a deep search on the internet, see if anyone that's close that's doing it. And you could do it in, you know, per US claims, per European patent claims, China patent claims, and then see how things develop. Off the top of my head, those are the quickest, the lowest hanging fruit, how to do that. The next question that was asked is by someone named Anju. As someone who works in education, is there anything you recommend to build a culture of innovation within the school system, early secondary learning around IP, any resources you suggest? So my wife is a teacher. My kids love robotics and science. I mean, you have to just make it, in my experience, what I find works with my kids and with in my wife's school is make it competitive. Make a competition. Who comes up with something cool? And people usually, when there's a prize, when there's some incentive, people start to think about it. Like if you're in a company and you have a low innovation rate, the way you encourage that is you give people awards when patents are considered for being filed, when ideas are submitted for patent filings or patents are ultimately filed or granted. You'll be surprised, you know, if you give people $500, say, you know, for every invention they come up with, that people will come up with stuff. And there are even ways to deal with it without paying people money. For example, I know of companies that give days off for every invention that's considered. So instead of you paying something, you'd say, if I submit your idea for a patent, then you will get, you know, 2 days off, for example. And that does quantify into financial value for those people. Any resources? Nothing off the top of my head, but I think the competitive nature, you know, of capitalism and IP, and there's also emotions about it. That people, it's my idea. Like I came up with it. There's a personal thing to it, that makes people to compete. And the examples that I would give, they have these competitions, they have these hackathons in Japan, in the US, and South Korea, and Israel, and Canada, and they come up with these craziest inventions that you can imagine because of the competitive nature of it.
And practice, and like go to those hackathons over and over again. You might do one and do nothing, but then you see how other people do it, and you just hear other ideas, and you start to have your own ideas. So it is a skill you can kind of practice, like other skills, and thinking through how you would sell it or bring it to market is another skill you can practice with people. And again, once you've had 10 ideas and thought about how you can bring them to market 10 times and really talk with some other people about it, you get pretty good at it, and you start to realize where the certain choke points are and things like that.
Someone asked, Karm Bala asked the question about at what stage should a medical innovator realistically begin thinking about patent protection, an idea, prototype, or clinical validation? In my experience, at the idea stage. Part of the reason is, first, is you don't know what, the minute you have an idea, you don't know what other people are doing that are outside of your brain, that are not your friends, right? You don't know what people are filing every day. You don't know if people are doing things behind your back, if your people are filing things that are at which your idea becomes obvious. So that's one reason. Second reason is, if you have an idea, you go to a prototype, you have to talk to people. You may have to get investment. You may have to talk to government. You may have to talk to, do demos. All these situations, you may be publishing your idea, and that's something to be concerned about. And another thing to think about is that, if in the context of medical innovation, which is unique relative to everything else, is that there's the device itself. If you have a product like a syringe, versus a way of using a syringe to either diagnose something, to treat something, to ameliorate something, each one of those is considered a patentable idea. And what you're treating varies, whether it's a headache, whether it's a earache, whether it's sore throat. Each one of them is considered a non-obvious idea of the usage of the product. So in the context of medicine, you theoretically have more than one patent out the door because of the device itself, plus its application and use in the context of, as they call them, gerunds, diagnosing, treating, ameliorating, and then what you're doing with that. Headache, earache, handache. So now, the permutationally wise, you could end up from one patent, one idea on one invention. It starts to spawn off and branch into different directions. You end up with a patent family. And then if you want a license, what you could consider doing is, for yourself, you reserve the rights that you are actually doing, and then you license out the rights that are not competitive with you. So I would go to Sayf and say, Sayf, I'm only interested in dealing with headaches. You go deal with earaches. I don't care. That's not my problem. And you could use the same device for dealing with earaches. And they're all completely different. And the third thing to think about is, when you come, in my experience, dealing with medical devices, you usually come up with one idea. Then you start to build a prototype, iterate demos, and then you realize there's more and more and more intellectual property and more innovation that comes up. You want to file a second patent that builds on your first one, so you now start to branch even further and ideate in different directions. And that allows for you to consider licensing, for you to consider keeping it for yourself, asserting it, all these things that you could do with the patent.
How careful do you have to be disclosing to investors? That's always been something I've worried about.
So yeah, a lot of people are going to be, they're not going to sign an NDA just to talk to you. So, the idea is that, as they say, you want to disclose enough to keep them asking for more, but not that much that you give away the crown jewels. Okay. So you want to let me give you an analogy, and people love this analogy. I don't know why, but the movie Back to the Future, right? So if I come to you, Saif, and I say, hey, I invented a time machine that can travel in time, you're going to say, oh, that's cool. It works. And I say, well, if you want to learn further, let's get into negotiations and we could talk about it. But then I have to give you an NDA, because then we're starting serious negotiations. In contrast, if you could just say, I have a new idea, That's not gonna. That's too abstract. So you got to the right balance is you got to think about it. You have to know your audience, trust with your audience, and at the same time not give away the crown jewels in the beginning. Someone just asked the question, Sam Khan, from a financial services perspective in banking and financial trading, how can we embed innovation and early IP into our services, especially if our algorithms are working with AI? If we're really heavily on AI, do we still have patents? So yeah, I do lots of fintech stuff. So typically speaking, in my experience, a couple of questions I ask. First is, why do you want to get patents? Right? Some people just want to get patents to hang them on the wall. If you want to hang patents on the wall, um, uh, that's fine, and there's a place for that, and there are cost-effective ways of doing it. If you want to get patents to actually assert against other people, to exclude them from doing it, you have to think about, before you even consider filing for a patent, how am I actually going to police it? And this is one of the things I mentioned earlier. If you're dealing with, for example, speed trading technologies, where it's important how close you are to the stock exchange, or what kind of a bandwidth you're using to trade. In those situations, unless I'm actually in your data center, in your office, there is no way anyone is going to disclose how they're doing it. So things like that, I'm not sure I would put in a patent application, because I think you lose your competitive advantage at that point. Rather, I would focus more on things that are outward facing, that I can detect by hiring a sophisticated a private investigator, a sophisticated engineer. If they can use your system, and like, for example, with Claude and DeepSeek this week, they were using distillation. If someone can distill your financial strategies or your trading secrets from just sitting in a computer and operating your system, yeah, those things I would patent. But if things are just absolutely not discoverable, there's an air gap, for example, or there's just no way to find something out, in those situations, I probably would keep it as a trade secret. But again, that doesn't mean you don't do anything internally. There are ways to deal internally with a trade secret, but you still have to follow the process to do its own appropriate thing.
And ask if you can manage your system or partition your system, break up your system to create that situation. Does the end user really need to see this one part? This is something very special. I can separate that a little bit and only expose the insights, for example, for the end user. So you have to think about that early on as well. How do I partition things? What do I give to the end user? What do I keep secret?
So one topic, we didn't mention it, but I think it's very important for everybody to hear, is ownership. A lot of times people invent and they think they actually own the idea. And that's not always true. If you work in a university, there are certain universities, they make you sign IP ownership agreements, or if you work for an employer, they may have made you sign one. So before you even consider filing for a patent, you need to just make sure that you actually own the idea that you invented. That's an important thing, because if you do that and you grow, and then you find out later that, hey, this is not even your idea, we have a big problem. And it's very, very expensive to deal with later. Someone just Dr. Rasul Asal asked the question, if I disclose sensitive IP under NDA to multiple parties and information later leaks, how do I realistically prove who breached the agreement? That is very difficult. In generally speaking, in my experience, you usually do not want to do that. You usually want to have one agreement with one party. You don't want to have a multi-party agreement, because then everybody blames each other. So the way I would suggest, if you have to talk to multiple people, to compartmentalize the information. And then once you compartmentalize it, make sure you know what you're disclosing to each party. So you know where the leaks come from. Now, one of the ways people deal with this is they insert fake information into different disclosures. So for example, if I talk to Sayf, I would talk about things using Java code. And then when I talk to Simran, I would talk to things about using Python code, and I would put in flags in there. And if information leaks using Python, I know it's Simran and not Sayf. Sorry, Simran. and vice versa. But this way, the false information allows you to later to try to see where the leakage originally came from.
I really like that.
they use that to that trick with maps in Cold War. The Soviets would make fake maps with fake rivers and fake bridges to make like decoys they now use in Ukraine for same reasons to be able to track and trace it downstream.
I
I
love it.
think we're at 1 hour. Simran?
Yeah, right on the dot. And I think we sort of naturally went into the question and answer segment, which was lovely. So I'm glad that we had some time for audience engagement as well. I just want to say that this is going to be recorded, and it has been recorded, so it will be available on our YouTube library because it's the month of Ramadan. I think a lot of people who wanted to join couldn't make it, unfortunately. So I'm glad those who joined were able to engage very deeply. And I'm sure your insights will help everyone once it's recorded. We'll try to do an insights report as well and publish that. But thank you so much, Mr. Roman. Thank you so much, Dr. Sayf. I think this is one of the most insightful sessions we've had. And it's lovely to see it being so interactive as well. It's sort of, I just realized maybe we should have like a clinic or a lab where if you have some time in the future, it would be amazing for some of our students working on some ideas to come share them a little bit more deeply and get some advice as well. Thanks so much. And we're looking forward to hopefully meeting you both in Dubai soon. We'd love to host you at the University of Dubai. Thanks for everyone who joined this evening, and we'll be back soon with another session of Signal. We'll keep you guys posted. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Perfect. Thanks. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.